Hey everyone, and welcome back to today's Explainer. Today, we're diving into literally one of the most dynamic, unstoppable forces on planet Earth, plant growth. When we look at a towering oak tree or a tiny sprouting seed, it's so easy to just think of plants as static objects, right? But honestly, beneath the surface, there's this chaotic, highly structured, and mathematically beautiful process of cellular multiplication and specialization happening every single second.
To give you an idea of the sheer mind-boggling scale we're talking about here, think about this. A single cell in a watermelon can increase its size up to 350,000 times. I mean, that's wild. Or look at the root apical meristem of a maize plant. It can churn out 17,500 new cells every single hour. So yeah, plant growth isn't just some slow, passive occurrence. It is an incredibly active, energy-packed biological marvel.
All right, here's our roadmap for today's Explainer. 1. Fundamentals of plant growth. 2. Phases and growth rates. 3. The paths of cells. 4. Plasticity in plants. And 5. Plant hormones and regulators.
Let's jump right into Section 1, Fundamentals of Plant Growth. Okay, let's start with the basics. In biological terms, growth is an irreversible, permanent increase in the size, mass, or volume of a cell, an organ, or an entire organism. Basically, it's a one-way street. A plant isn't like a balloon you can just deflate. It's building permanent physical structures, and that costs energy. It all relies on this delicate balance of metabolic processes, building things up, which we call anabolism, and breaking things down, or catabolism.
Now, if we look at a plant root, growth actually happens across 3 distinct zones. And here's a really cool thing about plants. Unlike us humans, whose growth pretty much stops after a certain age, plants have what's called an open form of growth. They can literally keep growing indefinitely throughout their entire lifespan, all thanks to these special dividing cells called meristems. Down at the very tip of the root, we have the meristematic zone. Cells here are packed with protoplasm, they have large nuclei, and they are constantly dividing. Just behind that is the elongation zone, where those cells get physically larger thanks to increased vacuolation and depositing new cell wall material. And finally, furthest from the tip is the maturation zone, where those cells reach their absolute maximum size and specialize.
Moving on to Section 2, Phases and Growth Rates. So when we measure growth over a specific period of time, we're looking at a growth rate. Down at the cellular level, this increase generally follows one of 2 mathematical paths, arithmetic or geometric growth. It's kind of like a numbers game. In arithmetic growth, after a cell undergoes mitosis, only one of the 2 resulting daughter cells keeps dividing. The other one? It stops dividing and starts to mature. But in geometric growth, both daughter cells retain that ability to divide, which leads to a massive, rapid, exponential multiplication.
And these 2 growth types look completely different when you graph the data out. With arithmetic growth, you're just continuously adding a steady amount of new cells, so the data creates a perfectly straight linear curve. Super straightforward. But with geometric growth, which is what you'd typically see when a zygote is developing into an early embryo, the numbers form this classic S shape, or a sigmoidal curve. It starts off slow in what we call the lag phase, then rockets upward exponentially during the log phase as every single cell divides. And finally, it levels off in the stationary phase, once resources start running out.
Now, if you want to actually compare the growth between 2 different plant parts, you have to use 2 specific metrics, absolute growth rate and relative growth rate. Let's look at this example. Leaf X starts at 10 square centimeters and grows to 15. Leaf Z starts way bigger, at 70 square centimeters and grows to 75. Okay, so both leaves increase their total surface area by exactly 5 square centimeters in the exact same time frame. That means their absolute growth rate is completely identical. But wait, look closer. Leaf X grew by a massive 50% of its original size. Meanwhile, that huge leaf Z only grew by a tiny fraction of its starting size. So the relative growth rate, which measures the growth relative to where it started, is significantly higher for the smaller leaf.
Section 3, The Paths of Cells. Which brings us to this incredibly fascinating 3-step journey of cellular specialization. Step 1 is differentiation. This is the moment a continuously dividing meristem cell finally grows up and matures. It undergoes structural changes to do a very specific job, like losing its protoplasm to become a hollow tube that transports water. But plants are insanely adaptable. Step 2 is de-differentiation. Under the right conditions, a mature, living, specialized cell can actually regain its ability to divide. It basically hits the biological reset button. And then step 3 is redifferentiation, where those newly dividing cells lose that ability all over again and mature to take on a completely new specialized task.
Putting it all together, the life cycle of a plant cell flows like this. It starts off as a dividing meristematic cell. It goes through plasmatic growth, then enters differentiation, where it expands, elongates, and becomes a fully mature cell. It then just lives out its life doing its specific job until it hits senescence, which is the biological term for aging, and, eventually, death. Ultimately, a plant's entire development is really just the sum of these two massive processes combined: growth and differentiation.
Section 4. Plasticity in plants.
Now, think about this biological problem. Plants can't just get up and run away from bad weather or a terrible environment. So instead, they use something called plasticity. They actually alter their physical structures in response to their environment or their current stage of life. Take the buttercup plant, for example. It shows off this amazing trick called heterophyly. The leaves that are completely submerged underwater grow into this highly dissected, feathery shape, which lets water flow right through them without tearing them apart. But the aerial leaves above the waterline, they're broad and flat to catch as much sunlight as possible. We also see this happen as plants age, like in coriander, where the juvenile leaves look totally different from the mature ones. The plant is literally redesigning itself on the fly to survive.
Section 5. Plant hormones and regulators.
So how is all of this actually controlled? Well, all the growth, the structural changes, the differentiation we've talked about is managed by intrinsic chemical compounds called plant growth regulators, or basically plant hormones. We can split them up into two main teams. First, you have the promoters: auxins, gibberellins, and cytokinins. Think of these guys as the builders. They ramp up activities like cell division, cell enlargement, flowering, and seed formation. On the flip side, we have the inhibitors, primarily abscisic acid and ethylene. These act like the emergency brakes. When a plant gets wounded or stressed out by the environment, these hormones kick in to inhibit growth, trigger dormancy, or close the stomata to save water. It is a constant, delicate tug-of-war between pushing growth forward and pulling it back to ensure survival. Which leaves us with one final, provocative question to wrap up today's explainer. We established right out of the gate that meristems give plants an open form of theoretically limitless continuous growth. So, if they can grow forever, what actually determines a plant's final scale out in nature? Why don't giant redwood trees just keep growing straight up into outer space? As you dive deeper into this topic, think about the immense role of extrinsic factors. Things like water availability, oxygen levels, gravity, and just the sheer physics of structure. These all put a hard limit on biological scale. The genetic potential for a plant to grow might be infinite, but the environment always has the final say. Keep that in mind as you review this material and keep exploring the incredible mechanics of plant biology.
Thank you so much for visiting my YouTube channel and my unofficial biology on Facebook page. Thank you.